In our last video, Jeremy took us on a journey to discover the meaning of change management, why it is important for any successful implementation, and the top 3 things we should focus on. In today's video, we are going to chat about probably the most important part of an implementation, your software partner. How well you know your software partner will define every aspect from start to finish on whether the new technology will do what it is supposed to do 100% of the time. Hi, Jeremy. So a software provider is obviously the key to any successful technology implementation. I want to get into how well you really need to know them and why. But first, let's clarify what a software partner is, because I've heard different terms like software provider, software partner, implementer, integrator. What do all of those mean?
Yeah, so just to clarify some of those terms, number one, your software provider is going to be who sells you the licensing to the software itself, who gives you permission to use the software, and normally has some fees associated either at a user rate or at the company level. And so that's normally who you're going to refer to as your software provider. Your software partner or your implementer is going to be who's responsible for installing that software. And then finally, your integrator is going to be who ensures that those softwares are capable of speaking to each other. And so many times you may have a warehouse management solution, but you may also have an order management solution, a transportation management solution, all of those different key components. An integrator is going to make sure those all speak with each other. Now, a software provider may many times also provide the services for implementing and integrating the software. However, other times you may simply get your software from a provider and then get those other services from more of an expertise type shop. And so OpenSky, for example, is capable of selling the software, and we also implement that software. Some of our customers will buy the software from us. Others will buy the software and then come to us for support implementing.
What a great explanation. And I say that because with all of these terms, it can get really confusing. If nothing else, we now know that we need to ask for clarification when someone starts using each of those different terms. And that dovetails perfectly into talking about how well you really need to know them and why. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So let's make one thing clear. That relationship between yourself as a company and that software partner is a partnership. They need to be invested in your success just as much as you are. They need to make sure that their end goal is not selling you the software or not necessarily even implementing the software. They need to base their success off the KPIs that are most important to you. So if you have, as a company, certain goals that you need to set for your project, that software partner should be aware of those goals from day one, and that's what they should be looking to achieve. That's a completely comprehensive partnership that needs to include ultimately what you're looking to change, what you're absolutely not willing to change, and how much, if any, modification you want to have to your software. Ultimately, that software partner needs to be interested in what you need and also be responsible about how that software is implemented.
So then let's take a look at how a software provider can be a good fit for a company. And what are the 5 biggest questions you should be asking to make sure that that partnership is going to be successful?
Sure. I think first, when you start to pursue a software provider and you start that selection process, you need to understand the longevity of the product that you're implementing. And so within supply chain specifically, we're seeing so much change and so much technological advancement. If you look at automation, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, all of those buzz terms, the software needs to be capable of implementing those in the future. You need the ability to adapt. If you look at the way that software providers were producing software years ago, they weren't taking into consideration the ability of having touch screens or mobility throughout a warehouse. And ultimately, that's why we're seeing so many upgrades and implementations right now. You need a software provider that's cognizant of the change in the marketplace. You also need to ask them how your product will be supported in the future. Make sure you're getting to know not just that sales team, not just the product itself, but also the support team. How am I going to support this product long term? Who's going to answer the phone when I call? And how responsive are they going to be to my needs? And then I think you have to transition into understanding how you're going to learn about that product. So how am I going to be taught about the product as I'm implementing it? So as I'm rolling this software out, how are you going to teach me about the product? How am I going to learn from that? I think, and then you have to ask, how is this product going to integrate to my other products? So I may have order management systems, transportation management systems. I need to understand how well the product I'm implementing will integrate. And so how am I going to make sure that my orders are coming down to the system correctly? How have you done it before? Who have you worked with before? Don't be afraid to ask for previous experience when it comes to this software. And finally, you need to make sure that the software is going to be something that is self-sustaining, that you can implement over time. So I mentioned learning from the software provider before. You also need to make sure you're able to advance on your own. Are you capable of taking advantage of changes that come out with the software over time? So it kind of loops in some of those previous topics. Is it supportable? Is it sustainable? But then ultimately, you don't want to have to be married to a support network over a long period of time. You want to be able to have that self-sufficiency. Something we're proud of at OpenSky is some of the implementations we've done. We're seeing companies that don't specialize in logistics being able to really grow their system even though that's not their specialty. So we're empowering their IT departments to really grow in a self-sufficient manner and still use us for support when necessary.
So technology is changing all the time. What role does your software provider play in making sure the technology you are implementing today will take you into the future without too many additional costs or add-ons?
Sure. So something I like to do when I implement a software with a company, early on I like to understand what's most likely to change about their business. And so are they frequently implementing for different clients? Are they a 3PL that might have several different requirements that change over the period of time? Are they a business that might have, flexibility between temp control and ambient product, and they need to have flexibility to change that around? So I feel like if you go in with that approach, understanding what's most frequently changing about a company, you're able to make sure you configure those things in unison with them. The last thing I want to do is configure a software in a silo. Sure, there's certain configurations that will be one and done. You'll touch them once in a software development and never touch them again. However, what we're finding is when you implement a base product solution, there are going to be some configurations that require changes over time. And so configure those with an IT department so you don't have those revolving costs. I don't want you to have to come back to me every time you get a new customer in your warehouse or every time you have a change in a certain product type. You should be able to be self-sufficient, handle that change on your own, and control that cost internally within your IT department. And so if there are certain changes you're aware of that are coming in the future, understand what those changes are going into an implementation, understand how the software needs to work for you so you can mitigate those costs over time and they have the least amount of impact possible.
What are the top 5 benefits that you should really see when you're working with the right partner?
When I'm implementing a project, I like to stop and ask myself, and I like to remind my team, are you providing the 5 C's to that company? And I like to think of those C's as this. Number 1, curiosity. May seem like an odd choice, but ultimately you need someone implementing a software for you that's going to be curious about your business and that's going to challenge you, that's going to say, why are you doing it that way? You don't necessarily need someone that's just going to go with the flow and take your requirements and run. You want to be challenged on what you're doing today, and you want to make sure that your partner's fully understanding of what your business does and why you're doing it that way. I think in addition to curiosity, they should also have collaboration. And so ultimately, your implementation team should be an extension of your team. Think of it as a way of doubling, tripling the size of your team just by adding your software partner into that team. So it shouldn't just be that your 5 employees alone are the ones that are shouldering this project. It should be that you're working collaboratively with your software partner that allows you to really have a full team implementing this project. I think next is comprehension. And that one's a little bit hard to understand, but ultimately what it boils down to is you're working with a partner that has done several implementations. You're working with partners that have seen hundreds of warehouses potentially around the country. Use that to your advantage. Ask them how other companies are doing this. Use them as kind of a knowledge source, as a research capability to understand what others are doing with certain challenges in the industry and what works best and what may not work. The 4th C is caution. Now this one's really interesting because you think to yourself, well, why would I want someone that's cautious? But truthfully, You need that software partner to keep you in check. I think if you look at softwares that become heavily customized or that have a really unique code base, it's because they weren't implemented with caution. I'll be honest, I have no issue telling a client they're too far off the reservation. They're off the rails. They need to bring it back in with base product functionality. And so I have no issue warning a client that they're asking for too much of a software. They may be trying to compensate for a business lack somewhere else. And well, ultimately that shouldn't necessarily be the responsibility of a warehouse management system or a workforce management system or whatever you happen to be implementing. And so they need to be cautious. And finally, going along with that, I need a software company that's going to be creative. And so if you're asking me to stay within the confines of a base product, to not customize a solution, then you need to be creative about how you leverage the base product solution. You know, something out of the box, you still need to have kind of an open mind to transforming that software into something that truly fits your needs. So maybe it's, you know, extending the software to a point that a description on a screen reads a little bit differently, or that we expose something to a user that might have been hidden before and still provide you with a supportable code base. That's ultimately a product of creativity and something your software partners need to have.
So with a new technology, once it's been approved, implementation is on the horizon. What does that process look like?
Well, buckle up. It looks like a challenge, ultimately. So what you're in for is a whole different atmosphere of project. It's one thing to select a software, and that's a good group to have together, and it's good to have their input on the actual execution of a project, but ultimately it's now about assembling that perfect team for your business. Kind of finding those that have an open mind about the future, that are aware of what you do great and aware of what you don't do so great. You want them to be part of your project team. You want to get those folks huddled together. You want to make sure that you're ready for an open-minded design conversation, an open-minded discovery conversation around what you're doing today, how it needs to change in the future, and you need to make sure the entire business is aligned. You have a large project in front of you. You need to make sure you have the right team available and that your software partners are part of that team.
So we've learned a lot from Jeremy today and what to look for in a software partner, what you should ask, and what you can expect if you've chosen the right one for you. Stay tuned in our next video to learn why no modifications should be a best practice.